Hello, thank you very much. Let me see if this works. Here we go. I'm Louis, I'm from Assemble. This is Assemble. It's one of our projects in London. We do a lot of work in London, where I'm from, where many of us are from. Very much, although we've done a lot of stuff around the world, me personally, and a lot of us, we are kind of very rooted in place, and think that a kind of very deep understanding of a place is really important in order to build well. I haven't got long, it's only 20 minutes, so I will try to, so apologies if it's a bit light on detail, but I will try to get in as much as possible. Just a bit about how we started. We kind of started off working with temporary projects, temporary theatres, cinemas, that kind of thing, exhibition work. And then over the years, we kind of started doing a few proper buildings, not done very many of them, but this is an art gallery that we designed in London for the university in South London called Goldsmiths. An important part of the way that we work is craft, on this particular project, the kind of expression of that was that we designed and built the facade, so this green kind of structure that you see as a mock-up of a facade that we built for the art gallery project that eventually was applied onto that kind of metal tank that you see. But we kind of built all of that ourselves in our workshop. And I guess another really important part of the way that we tend to work, although a lot of our work is kind of traditional architecture where we design things for a client, we also think that it's very important, probably a lot more important than architecture itself, is what's actually happening inside the building, what the actual project is itself. And so we work on that too. And this is a public access workshop that we built in London. So it's kind of like a library for tools, is the idea. So a place where there are the sort of tools that you would never be able to have in your garden shed, but it's publicly accessible. And this was a project that we it was our idea, and we managed to get some money from the local government, and they provided us a building, and we actually we set up not only the building and the equipment, but the company as well, and hired the staff and things like that. And that's a way that we work quite often. Similarly, in New Orleans, we worked for a philanthropist to set up a free access fashion school called Material Institute. And again, the process was similar in terms of working in residence. So going there, spending a lot of time in the place, learning about it, understanding it, and kind of setting up not only a building but also an organization. And actually, this project was one in which was probably the last project that I did outside of London, because when you do a project, when you spend enough time somewhere, it's one of those things you realize how much you don't know, and how important it really is to really understand a place deeply. But I'd like to speak about my latest project, which is 25 Princelet Street in London, in Spitalfields. And it was kind of strange because we were just sort of given the keys to this house by this obscure Swiss charity. And we kind of went inside, and it was very overgrown, and there's these kind of strange structures in the garden, and it was just completely full of stuff, like it was a complete mess. But it was kind of rather beautiful as well. Had a lot of these old features. And on the top floor, and it's quite a tall, it's a 5-story building. You had to take a ladder to get into this room. It was clearly a space where somebody lived. But there was no. When we first, it took us about, I don't know, a month or two to find the toilet. We were like, where did she go to the toilet? And it was actually in the garden. So she must have walked, 4 floors down a ladder, all the way down, and then into the garden outside to go to the toilet. Despite living in this huge house. And as we went through the stuff, we kind of discovered these quite amazing works of art and unfinished projects and things like that. And I'm just going to read what it says. Sorry, I'm going to have to look really closely at the screen. But we found this piece of clothing that you can see on the bottom right. And it's actually a whole series of pieces of clothing, and it says, they have slogans on them. So it says, "You said we don't think, so I made you mirror clothes to spread the light of torches, and I thought I was paying you a compliment when I said I thought you were the most thoughtful person I ever met. And looking at this, I notice how you resist the thought and thoughts the syntax seductively offers." So, I'm not quite sure what that means, It turned out to be this quite amazing woman. I think this is a video which I'm going to try and skip, called Annetta Pedretti. And she studied architecture at the Architectural Association in London. And she also then did a PhD in cybernetics, which I don't know if you're familiar with cybernetics. It's the study of feedback loops. And it was quite influential in the early days of computing. But Annetta, she really lived in this house, and the house was the work, and the work was the house. And so she ran this publishing company, and she printed and bound. She has this kind of huge lithographic printer in one of the rooms, and she manufactured books on cybernetics by herself in this house. And they're quite cool. I mean, she's got these kind of perfect bound books, but then she also has more experimental stuff, like on the right, where, because cybernetics is about feedback loops, a lot of the books take the form of conversations where people write each other letters. And that was because she thought that the book was too linear a format. And so she's tried to make a book out of woven paper on the right, and all the writing is kind of going in different directions. Anyway, it's very conceptual. And she worked with all different formats, so she has all these videos, many of which are 17-hour videos of the tides and things like that. And she had these amazing clothes. This is quite a cool project where she tried to design a flag for a multicultural society. And she made a lot of these flags as well, which are actually really cool. So there's some of her photos, and then some of the flags that she actually manufactured herself are still in the house as well. She also applied cybernetic principles to beekeeping as well, which we don't know too much about. Apparently beekeeping has a lot to it, but I'm not too sure. Anyway, we have some of her honey. But she was also very political. She was a committed feminist, and that was very apparent in a lot of the literature and objects that we found in the house. And she was very politically motivated in terms of kind of development and community issues in the area as well. And she took quite I guess, what you might consider an artistic process to campaigning. So this were pages from a petition that she put together to save an old swimming baths, which was not a successful campaign, unfortunately. The baths were demolished. And she also participated in a campaign against a railway development as well. But interestingly, when you type her name into Google, one of the things that comes up are these minutes from the House of Lords, which is the upper chamber of the UK Parliament. And she's speaking about this railway project because the tunnels actually go directly beneath the house. But what's interesting is that what she's saying is that although she has complaints about the process and the railway, she points out that what's really unfair is that the only reason she's able to come and speak to the House of Lords is that she is a property owner whose land is affected. So if she didn't own the property, if she was just a tenant or something like that, she wouldn't be granted an audience in this forum. She was also a committed craftswoman as well, and she did a lot of work on the house herself. So she's kind of fixing some masonry here. She was spinning the spindles for the staircase on a lathe. She built all the windows herself. So there's about 50 windows in the house, and she made all of them and fitted them all. She worked on the kind of bracketry around the front door as well. So anyway, what do we want to do? This is an image that we put together to kind of represent our vision for the house. And the idea is that it is a centre for land reform and housing justice. And it kind of fits together with, this is a screenshot from our website. The project's called House of Annetta. And Assemble, we're obviously interested in land issues and housing issues, and so was Annetta. And in fact, I'll talk about it a bit more in a minute. So is the foundation, the Swiss charity that actually owns the house. I guess the idea came out of the fact that, because this is a short talk, I haven't really had much time to go into the context of where this place is. It's in, I guess, what might be called the poorest part of central London. It's a traditionally poor area. It used to have large kind of industrial sites which were very centrally located, very close to it, which by the 1990s were all closed down, and quickly it was kind of gentrified and It's a bit of a tourist area, actually. There's lots of graffiti and stuff. People come to like see the graffiti, the famous graffiti and things like that. But I suppose the thought was, London is a world centre for hyper-development, and land rights issues and housing rights issues have a very long way to go. Things are really getting worse. It's getting more difficult to get housing, much more difficult. It's more difficult to get into London. People are being actually removed from London, people who live there, because the local governments are not able to house them. So the issues are huge. And what can we do with this one place? And I suppose that's why we want to make it a kind of a beacon or a centre or somewhere where people can, I guess, think more intellectually and campaign a bit more for these things, rather than turning it into social housing itself or cheap workspace itself, And I guess we're slightly inspired by some of the kind of squatted social centre that you get, or that you at least used to get a lot more over the years throughout the UK. But the idea of a building or a place as a kind of campaigning centre, and as a bit of a like two fingers to the establishment as well. And many of these places do still exist as well. So it's a kind of physical manifestation of resistance. And, London's a very big place, obviously, and there are a lot of disparate campaign groups working, anti-gentrification campaign groups working very far apart from each other. And we wanted to set up a place where people can come together and can talk and can share knowledge, because, obviously, there's a huge power imbalance. Developers and local governments are very, very well resourced, have a lot of professional advisors and things like that, people like us. Whereas, community groups are often trying to fight this redevelopment or are trying to do their own thing, are working in their free time. So we wanted to provide resources for them. And at the same time, there's a bit more of an intellectual movement as well, which is looking at land reform and thinking about some of these kind of very long-standing issues. The story that I always tell is about our office, which is in South London, is owned by a company called Grosvenor. And Grosvenor is the biggest landlord in the UK. They own a lot of kind of the very wealthy areas of central London. And they're headed by the Duke of Westminster, so they're this old aristocratic family. And, they took the land by the sword in the 11th century. That's how they got it, and it's not a secret. The current Duke of Westminster, his father, who's dead now, he was asked by a reporter, you're a very successful businessman, have you got any advice for young entrepreneurs? And he said, just make sure that your ancestors were very close friends with William the Conqueror. And that was in the 11th century, and then you're like, well, what about America? So it's a big issue. Anyway, I don't have a lot of time left, but just wanted to quickly talk about process in the house. We're very much at the early stages. It's very barren inside. It's quite an amazing and magical place. And we're working in residence. We kind of set up an office with like lots of heaters and things like that. And we're putting on exhibitions. We're working with local campaign groups who are working in the immediate streets around us and giving them a base from which to work. And we're doing exhibitions and workshops and things like that. And I suppose, again, like without having had much chance to talk about the context, one thing that is quite interesting about this area is that, this house is like a very nice house. It's big. It's bigger than most of the houses on the street. And it's very old as well. It was built in the 18th century, 1705. But it wasn't that long ago, if you just look at the images on the left, that there's a few streets like this with these really old houses, and going back to the 60s and 70s, most of these houses would have been split up into flats, and poor people would have been living there, and there would have also been garment workshops and things like that. Whereas now they've all been renovated, turned into single-family houses, and they're owned by very wealthy people.
You're so happy to see me, aren't you?
Sorry, yeah.
You're so happy to see me.
Thank you for coming. This is the foundation that owns it. They're really great too. We're trying to replicate what they're doing. We're setting up a charity in the house to take land and property off the market so that it cannot be used for inheritance and speculation, and to manage land in a way that is good for the community, good for the planet, and good for building users. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Louis. Marvelous project. Just very, very short, if we would meet in 1 year, what would you be able to tell us about this?
1 year. I mean, I think with this project, 1 year is a very short amount of time.
I give you 2 years. Because we have a new conference coming up in 2 years, so that could be a time frame. 2 years.
I think I would hope that within 2 years we would be looking at doing some major building work. We're trying to raise money for the house through the National Lottery, so it's a kind of charitable funding, but it takes a really long time. It will probably take us 2 years to secure funding for that. But hopefully with the charity that was set up, hopefully in that time, we would have taken on some more properties. Unfortunately, it's a bit of an ugly business of, hobnobbing with wealthy people, trying to persuade them, to give away stuff.
I wish you good luck with that.
Thank you.
I understand that is a tough work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.